Poverty is increasing in America. The gap between the rich and poor is widening, and President Obama is supporting a minimum wage of $10.10. The debate is on. Stay tuned. Carib Nation is up next. In America and around the world, the gap between the rich and poor is growing. The middle class is not only disappearing in America, it's not even emerging in many countries around the world. And one of the issues that are being dealt with today in a heated debate in America and across the world is what constitutes a minimum wage. Today in our studio, we have with us Mr. Matthew Hanson. He's from the Working Families Campaign, and he will discuss with us how successfully they campaigned in Maryland to raise the minimum wage. Matthew, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me here today.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background? What did you study at university?
So when I was at university, I had a self-designed major, and I studied, my major is called Comparative Social Movements. So I went to school in New York City. And while I was there, I worked with different labor unions while at the same time getting a major in social movements, essentially how people create change and improve the world. And since then, I've gone to work for several political campaigns, most recently the campaign to raise the minimum wage in Maryland.
Now, I find it very interesting. Did you say you self-designed your degree?
Yes.
How does one do that?
There are different programs at universities across the country where if you feel like you don't fit into a specific category, like or a pre-existing major like political science or history, you can submit a proposal to the university to have a self-designed major. That's what I did at the City University of New York.
Very interesting. And is that how you became more conscious about these kinds of issues, like the minimum wage?
So when I went to university, I was already a social justice activist. I had spent time working on different campaigns. I had also just completed 2 years in AmeriCorps, which is the domestic Peace Corps. And after completing those 2 years of service, I decided that what I wanted to do was to go to work for an organization and dedicate my life to not just addressing the immediate needs, but trying to get to the root problem of issues that afflict people. And I did that through my major and through my subsequent work on different political campaigns.
And how did you get to Maryland, and how did you get involved with the Working Families Campaign?
So I work for Maryland Working Families, and we were invited to come to Maryland and help coordinate the Raise Maryland's minimum wage campaign.
Why do they call it Working Families? What is that about?
So Working Families is probably best known for our independent political party in New York City.
It's a political party?
In New York City, and an organization. There's, and it was instrumental in helping elect Mayor Bill de Blasio. But Working Families also, when we're not working on elections, we are also doing issue campaign work. And so we were invited to come to Maryland to help.
Who invited you?
Different members of the different organizations that
Tell us a bit about some of the organizations.
Yep. So we were invited to come to Maryland by different organizations that would ultimately make up the Raise Maryland, which is what we called the minimum wage campaign, Raise Maryland's minimum wage campaign. And they included leading labor unions and community organizations. And so Raise Maryland, and I say I was the campaign director because we just successfully passed an increase in minimum wage.
And what was the minimum wage in Maryland prior to the increase you just got?
So Maryland's minimum wage was $7.25 an hour. the legislation that we passed will raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour by 2018.
That is exactly what the federal government now under President Obama is trying to achieve.
Correct.
You've already been able to achieve that in Maryland?
Yes. Right now there are 21 states plus the District of Columbia that have a higher minimum wage than the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Maryland is now the second state. We followed Connecticut in raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. So yes. I
am aware that the municipality of San Francisco have their minimum wage at $10.55.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to know a little bit about the nitty-gritty. How does one, and how did you all organize this campaign? Why did you organize it? Is this going to bring people out of the poverty level?
Yeah, so let me tackle those, break those questions apart and tackle each one of them. So up until the 1980s, the minimum wage was enough to keep a family of 3 above the federal poverty level. But as the cost of living has continued to increase and minimum wage has stagnated, minimum wage workers, full-time minimum wage workers, folks who work 40 hours or more a week, oftentimes they're working 2 jobs, fall below the federal poverty line. And what we decided to do is, organizations across the country have decided to make this a central issue, in the campaign against income inequality, but also, more practically and directly to make a meaningful difference in folks' lives by ensuring that hard work receives fair pay, ensuring that no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty.
And you believe that this $10.10 will bring people above the poverty line?
Yes.
The World Bank says that in the developing world, that they brought people of some of these countries and they contribute to bringing people above the poverty line. You know what they talk about?
What?
Less than $1 per day and $2 per day. Can you believe that?
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Now, here in Maryland, for example, the actual campaign, what did you have to do? How did you design it? How did you implement it? How did you mobilize? How did you advocate?
So we launched our campaign in January of 2013, and we pulled together some of the leading organizations, progressive organizations across the state. So we had leading labor unions like 1199 SEIU, leading community organizations like Casa de Maryland and the NAACP, and leading faith organizations such as Bridge Maryland and Jews Unite for Justice, and Working Families was coordinating the campaign along with help from some of our friends nationally, like the National Employment Law Project. And we pulled together literally dozens and dozens of organizations to plan out a 2-year campaign. Maryland is an overwhelmingly blue state. Over 70% of the legislature, both in the House and the Senate, is Democratic, but it's still difficult.
So it was ripe for the picking?
At first glance, yes, but it's very difficult to pass progressive and meaningful legislation, economic legislation, right, that will affect people's pocketbooks. And so we knew that we had a uphill fight on our hands, and so we planned out a 2-year campaign. And the first year our bill was voted down in committee, 3-8. And this year we passed it overwhelmingly in both chambers, and that was really the result of the concentrated grassroots efforts from almost countless organizations, countless activists across the entire state.
But let me try to understand, because it's very important that people understand how you can influence positively the change of law. What were your arguments for the minimum wage to be 10.10? Was it?
Yep. So, we believe fundamentally that hard work deserves fair pay. And when we are paying workers $7.25 an hour, we're telling them that their time, that their labor is not valuable. And we believe that if you pay a worker at a minimum $10.10 an hour, that it will provide them a certain, real material benefits, right? They won't fall below the federal poverty line. They will be able to have a more comfortable, though not by any stretch of the imagination, easy life. We looked at who the largest low-wage employers are in the state, and what we found out is that contrary to popular perception, and popular perception is that most low-wage employers are mom-and-pop shops. But over 71% of all low-wage employers in the state of Maryland are large employers, and the largest amongst them, unsurprisingly, are Wal-Mart, McDonald's, Target, and Yum Brands, which is Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and businesses like that.
So will they be affected in the state of Maryland?
Yep.
So if anyone works now in the future with those companies, they have to pay them?
Yep, they will see the pay raise goes up in several steps over the next 4 years before it gets to $10.10 an hour, but starting next year, workers are going to see a raise in their paycheck, and they'll be able to go out and they will spend the money locally. They will be reinvesting money in the economy.
So there will be a forward multiplier effect, because
Yes.
people have money, they could purchase. If they purchase, then production will be done and
Exactly.
and workers would be employed, create jobs.
Right.
So you try to explain that to the lawmakers.
Right.
What were their arguments, or other sectors? Who are the other sectors that oppose your coalition?
So our biggest opponents were the Chamber of Commerce, which is a right-wing business organization, and the National Restaurant Association, which is also another right-wing business organization. And they represent the conservative elements of the business community who fight any attempt to increase the minimum wage. They really fight any attempt to improve the quality of lives of workers.
What are the arguments that they advance?
They may mostly employ scare tactics. So they tell legislators, they tell journalists, tell anyone who will listen that this is going to wreck the economy, that it's going to put employers are going to go out of business, it's going to cost jobs, it's going to somehow send folks deeper into poverty, none of which is true. And in addition to the numerous labor, community, and faith organizations I already mentioned, we also had the benefit of a great number of progressive business organizations who were supporting our effort.
So there were some private sector that supported you?
Yeah. It's a myth that the business community is opposed to these types of measures. We worked with an organization called Business for a Fair Minimum Wage, and together we recruited over 180 businesses across the state.
Across Maryland?
Yep, who support raising the minimum wage. And the reason these businesses support raising the minimum wage is because they know that when you pay a worker a fair salary, that they perform better. It means that you have higher productivity, you have reduced turnover.
Now, in the campaign itself, did you have to mobilize a lot of funding? Did you do ads on television, on the radio? Were they competing ads by the Chamber of Commerce, like an election campaign? Tell us a little bit about that aspect of the struggle in the media to reach the people of Maryland, to influence the lawmakers.
So the Working Families Organization, we organized folks to go across the state, knocking on doors, collecting tens of thousands of petition signatures, generating thousands and thousands of handwritten personal letters to legislators. We organized actions and demonstrations and press conferences, and we did do some radio ads. There wasn't a lot of competing ads, but we wanted voters, we wanted constituents, we wanted residents of Maryland to know that this fight was going on and that we needed their support to win. Numerous polls came out on the issue, and no matter how you frame the question, people overwhelmingly support a raise in minimum wage. Most of the polls showed that there was between 70 and 80% support overwhelming majority support in every part of the state.
And politicians are very concerned about polls. Is
that
correct?
And that's what we want them to know too. Overwhelming majority of Republican voters support raising minimum wage. Overwhelming majority of Democratic and independent voters. Overwhelming majority of voters in every part of the state, even the most conservative parts of the state, support raising the minimum wage. The only folks who were not supporting it were the elected officials at first, and so we wanted to turn that broad support into deep support, really profound support, and move the legislators to do the right thing and pass this legislation.
I imagine you have interacted in the process of giving leadership to this campaign with members of the Maryland legislature.
Yes.
The actual members, the Democrats, the Republicans, and so forth. When you met them like you and I are speaking now, how did you go about convincing them?
So we recruited a lot of folks to do lobby visits, grassroots lobbying on this issue. We believed it was very important that legislators hear directly from folks in their community, be they business leaders or faith leaders or workers. So they would hear the case for raising the minimum wage from just about every type of constituency in our coalition. And we had workers tell their stories, talk about how difficult it is to make ends meet when you receive poverty wages. We had businesses talk about...
So personal testimonies.
Yep, personal testimony.
Which is part of American culture. Huh?
Yep, and we presented facts and figures and research to, obviously personal testimony carries a lot of weight. We also wanted to show that the numbers were on our side as well.
Yeah. And how were you aware that you were going to get close to succeeding in getting this
really
approved?
It was an uphill battle. As I mentioned before, when we launched our campaign last year, our bill was actually defeated in committee. And if the bill doesn't get out of committee, it dies. And it was defeated 8-3.
Even though it was the Democrats were the majority in the committee?
Yep, they voted against it.
So there are Democrats who are very conservative on some of the issues, right?
Yes. And this year, our bill was more progressive than the one that ultimately passed. It called for indexing the minimum wage to the cost of living.
Explain what you mean for our audience of indexing the minimum wage to the cost of living.
So we supported an effort to index the minimum wage to the cost of living. And what that means is that each year as the cost of living rises, or it usually rises by a few percentage points.
Of course.
So your rent goes up, your groceries go up, gas goes up.
Gas goes up.
Yep. That minimum wage would automatically increase, so we wouldn't have to have this fight every 3 to 5 years. And we also supported an effort to increase the minimum wage for tipped workers. What a lot of folks don't know.
For tip workers,
yes.
This is very important because a lot of folks work in restaurants.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that, the tip issue?
Yes. And this is something most people are probably not aware of, but tipped workers have a different minimum wage. In Maryland, it was 50% of minimum wage. So instead of earning $7.25 an hour, their employers were paying them $3.63 an hour.
Wow.
And anything else, any tips that they would make would go towards making up the difference between what their employer paid them and what the state standard minimum wage was. And we supported an effort to try to raise it to 70%. We were not successful. Unfortunately, the legislators listened to the conservative and right-wing National Restaurant Association and actually hurt tipped workers in Maryland. But we were able to pass the $10.10 minimum wage, which is significant and which impacts literally hundreds of thousands of workers across the state.
So very quickly, let's go now to the federal level. There's been a precedent now just near to Washington, D.C., the White House and the Congress.
Yes.
Down in Annapolis.
Yeah.
Very progressive. So how do you believe this campaign at the federal level will go for the $10.10, for the $10.10? So
our hope is that we will demonstrate to other campaigns around the country, other states, and to Congress that there is a strong mandate to raise the minimum wage to at least $10.10 an hour.
Are you actually engaged in that now? Or you're just providing lessons from your experience of how you worked successfully?
Loosely, the state minimum wage campaigns, obviously we talk to each other, and the joke is, I guess, all politics is local, so I probably wouldn't have a lot of personal advice to give to folks in Minnesota or elsewhere where there are campaigns.
But at the federal level,
yeah.
Right now with Obama and the Senate
Yes.
and the Congress, who is leading that campaign the way working families led the campaign in Maryland?
So I believe at the federal level, the national campaign to raise the minimum wage is chaired by the National Employment Law Project, who were part of the Raise Maryland campaign. And so just in the last 2 weeks, Connecticut also raised their minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. Maryland we raised our minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. And Minnesota has raised the minimum wage, though I don't know if the bill has been signed yet, to $9.50 an hour. So by winning these campaigns across the country, from the East Coast to the Midwest to the West Coast, we are sending a clear message that there's a strong will to get this done, and that we hope, we want our elected officials to listen to us. Problem is that the Republicans control the House of Representatives. It's dominated by the Tea Party faction, and they're blocking any effort to improve the lives of workers.
So are you optimistic at the federal level that we'll be able to achieve this, or because the elections are coming up in November, you think this is going to be killed at some point?
Well, we really hope that in terms of making this an election issue, this is actually a really good thing for elected officials to run on. Politicians don't obviously have the highest approval rating. Minimum wage has one of the highest approval ratings of any issue. As I mentioned, in Maryland, we had polls showing over 80% of voters supported it, majority of Republicans and Democrats. It was like 95% of Democrats support it. So there's really no reason for an elected official or any politician not to support this issue.
So the difference between your campaign and the campaign to have success at the federal level is that at each state in America, people have to be organized, mobilized,
Yes.
and doing advocacy to their representatives of Congress.
Exactly.
So they could get the message.
Yes.
So when congressmen go back and congresswomen back to their constituencies, back to their offices and their districts, as we say, the message has to be given to them.
Yes. We were fortunate enough to have the support of our congressional delegation in Maryland. Congressman John Delaney was an early supporter.
So you need some congressmen to give leadership.
We want them to take leadership in
to take
Congress.
leadership.
It was these battles at the state level obviously take place in the state legislature. So we need the elected delegates and senators, state senators, to lead there. But we enjoyed the support of Congressman John Delaney, Congressman Elijah Cummings, Congresswoman Donna Edwards, and others who came out early on and said we support our state legislature doing this. And obviously, if other members of Congress can do the same thing and stand with their constituents and call for a higher minimum wage, hopefully we can get this done at the federal level too. And
the minimum wage in Maryland will do good for both white workers, black workers, brown workers, all workers.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's more an issue of class than an issue of race. Is that correct?
Raising minimum wage is not just a question of economic justice. It's a question of social justice as well. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And one of the original demands of the March on Washington, the 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech, was a raise in the minimum wage. I believe they were calling for a $2 an hour minimum wage in 1963. If you adjusted that for inflation, that would be over $15 an hour. The stereotype of minimum wage workers is that they are, young white males, high school or college age, who are basically just looking for fun money. That's not the case. It's not the case anywhere. The average minimum wage worker in Maryland is a woman. It's a person of color. About a third of minimum wage workers have children. A lot of them are single parents, and the majority of them have some form of college education. So these are folks who are really trying to get ahead, but because they're being paid poverty wages, the deck has been stacked against them. So raising minimum wage is not just a smart thing to do, but it's also the just thing to do as well.
So in Maryland, the people in that coalition have been very empowered.
Yes.
And they would be potential for other forms of activities and advocacy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Were you able to train a lot of activists out of this process over the 2 years?
A lot of veteran activists came into the campaign, and a lot of new folks came into the campaign.
Did young
as well.
people come into it?
Yeah, we had the support of different young Democratic Party clubs across the state and different campus groups as well. I think the thing that really emboldens people to ask for more is winning and winning real significant victories. And so our hope is that by having passed this legislation, that folks across the state, our partners, activists who are involved in the campaign, will really be able to go back to their membership, and their memberships will see that they were able to fight and win, and that they'll continue to do so. And obviously, they did that before we were here. They'll do it after. But it's one of the things that we want to contribute to the fight for social and economic justice.
So civicism, civic consciousness, civic activism, volunteerism is still alive and kicking in America.
Yes, yes.
At least in Maryland, you've
yes.
proven it. And the degree you got in social movements was worth the while.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Matthew Hanson, I'd like to thank you very much for giving us this in-depth insight into what it takes to achieve the minimum wage in the state of Maryland.
Thank you.
And I hope that at the federal level, as we struggle and support President Obama's position that we should have all across America a minimum wage of $10.10, that we'll be able to achieve it. But it's not only in the US where the middle class is disappearing and where the gap between the rich and the poor is deepening. All across the world today, one is finding that the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and that many people across the world live with less than $1 a day. And many people who complain that jobs are leaving America and going to other countries where they are not respecting the minimum wage, there is also a call, not only for a minimum wage in America, but a minimum wage in China, in India, and across the world, so that people could be lifted out of the poverty line. Until next time, I'm Paul Nehru, Tennessee, for Carrick Nation.